before history was written, before kings carved their names into stone, before the first cities rose from dust, there were stories. Stories older than memory. Stories that speak of beings who were not human, yet walked among men. They were called gods. But what if they were not gods at all? What if the earliest civilizations of Earth were not built by chance, but by design? And what if the truth has been buried, not because it is false, but because it is too dangerous to accept? Somewhere in the silence of ancient Mesopotamia, between the ruins of forgotten temples and shattered tablets, a mystery still whispers. A name echoes through time. Anunnaki. It begins in the cradle of civilization, in the land between two rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates carve through the earth like veins of memory. The Sumerians emerged. They were not primitive. They were not lost. They were advanced. They built cities when the rest of the world still wandered. They created writing, mathematics, law, and yet they claimed none of it was their own, because, according to them, everything they knew came from the gods, not distant gods, not invisible forces, but beings who descended from the heavens, beings who walked among them, beings who ruled them. They called them the Anunnaki, those who from heaven came. Ancient clay tablets speak of these beings with unsettling detail, not as myths, not as symbols, but as rulers, engineers, creators. They had names: Enlil, Enki, Inanna, powerful entities who governed the earth, divided territories, and commanded humanity. And yet, the deeper one looks, the more unsettling the story becomes. Because these were not gods of pure light. They were divided, conflicted, sometimes benevolent, sometimes ruthless. They fought among themselves. They made decisions that shaped humanity, not always for its good. And at the center of it all lies a question that refuses to fade. Why were they here? According to the ancient accounts, the Anunnaki did not come to save humanity. They came because they needed something. The Sumerian texts describe a distant world, a planet beyond our skies, a place called Nibiru, a wandering celestial body said to travel in a vast, elongated orbit around the sun, a world in decline, a civilization in need of survival. Their atmosphere was failing, their resources diminishing. And so they looked outward, toward Earth, a planet, rich in something they desperately needed: gold, not for wealth, not for beauty, but for survival. The texts suggest something extraordinary, that gold, when processed in a certain way, could be used to repair their atmosphere, to shield their world, to extend their existence. And so they came, not as explorers, not as visitors, but as miners. The earliest accounts describe the Anunnaki extracting gold from the earth, deep within its crust, in conditions too harsh, too relentless, even for them. And so a problem arose. They needed workers, laborers, beings who could endure the burden. And that is where humanity enters the story. At first, they tried to do the work themselves, but the tablets speak of unrest, of rebellion among the Anunnaki, of workers refusing to continue. The burden was too great, the conditions unbearable. And so, a decision was made. A decision that would change the course of this planet forever. They would create a new being, a hybrid, part of them, part of the creatures already on Earth. The texts describe a process that sounds disturbingly familiar. Not magic, not divine creation, but something closer to genetic engineering. They took the essence of life from themselves, and combined it with the primitive hominids that roamed the earth. They shaped, altered, refined, trial after trial, failure after failure, until it worked. A new being emerged, not fully Anunnaki, not fully animal, but something in between, something capable of thought, of obedience, of labor, humanity, created not as children of the divine, but as tools, as workers, as servants. The first humans were not free. They were not sovereign. They were bound, forced to mine the earth, to extract the very resource that their creators needed. And yet, something unexpected happened. Something the Anunnaki did not fully anticipate. Humanity began to evolve, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They began to question, to feel, to desire, and within that awakening lay a threat, because a being that can think can also rebel. Some of the Anunnaki saw this as a problem. Others saw it as something else, a possibility. The ancient texts speak of a division, of disagreement among the gods. Enlil, the authority, the enforcer, saw humanity as nothing more than a tool, replaceable, controllable, disposable. But Enki, the One, associated with knowledge, with creation, saw something different. He saw potential. He saw intelligence. He saw something worth preserving. And so, the conflict began, quiet at first, subtle, but growing, because the question was no longer about gold. It was about humanity itself. What were humans meant to be? Servants, or something more? As humanity multiplied, as cities began to form, as knowledge spread, the balance began to shift. Humans were no longer just workers. They were becoming a force. And with that came fear. The texts describe a moment of crisis, a time when humanity had grown too numerous, too loud, too unpredictable. Enlil saw it as a threat, a disturbance, something that needed to be corrected. And so a decision was made. A devastating one. The flood. A cataclysm that would wipe the earth clean. A reset. A way to erase humanity and start again. The story is familiar. It echoes through cultures, through religions, through time. But within the Sumerian accounts, it carries a different weight. Because this was not an act of divine judgment. It was control. An attempt to undo what had been created. To silence a species that was becoming too aware. Too independent. But once again, Enki intervened. He defied the decision. He chose to preserve humanity. And so, he warned a man known in different traditions by different names, Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, Noah. He was told to build a vessel, to prepare, to survive what was coming. And when the waters rose, when the skies darkened, when the earth was consumed by chaos, humanity did not end. It endured, because someone chose to save it. And when the flood receded, the world began again. But something had changed. The direct rule of the Anunnaki began to fade. They withdrew, stepping back into the shadows, leaving behind only fragments, stories, legends, whispers, but traces remained. In the architecture that should not exist, in the knowledge that appeared too suddenly, in the myths that echo across civilizations that should never have been connected, and always the same theme: beings from the heavens, creators, rulers, watchers. But here is where the mystery deepens. Because if the Anunnaki were real, if they came from Nibiru, if they created humanity, then where are they now? Did they leave? Did they return to their distant world? Or did they remain, hidden, observing, waiting? Some believe that Nibiru still exists, a planet on a vast orbit, taking thousands of years to circle the sun, a world that appears, disappears, and will one day return. Others believe the Anunnaki never truly left, that they integrated, disguised, influenced, shaping humanity from behind the veil, not as rulers, but as silent architects, guiding, watching, waiting. And then there is the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the story is not about the past? What if it is about the present? Because when you look at the world today, you begin to notice patterns, control, power structures, invisible hands shaping visible outcomes, a constant tension between freedom and domination, between awakening and suppression. And you begin to wonder, are we truly independent, or are we still part of a design we do not fully understand? The idea is uncomfortable, even dangerous, because it challenges everything. It questions origin, purpose, identity. It asks whether humanity is truly at the top of the chain, or simply a creation that has outgrown its creators. But perhaps that is the point. Because whether the Anunnaki are real or symbolic, whether Nibiru exists or is a reflection of something deeper, the story forces a lifelong question. What does it mean to be human? If humanity was created for a purpose, does that purpose still bind us? Or have we become something more, something they did not expect, something they cannot control? There is something buried within these ancient stories, not just history, but a warning, a reflection, a mirror, because the greatest mystery is not whether the Anunnaki were real, it is whether humanity understands itself, whether we recognize our own power, our own potential, our own ability to shape the world, not as servants, but as creators. And perhaps that is what they feared, not rebellion, not disobedience, but awareness. Because once a being becomes aware, it cannot be controlled. And so the question remains, if those who came from the heavens once shaped humanity, who is shaping it now? And more importantly, what will humanity become when it finally remembers what it truly is?